Hey everybody, this is Adam B. Levine from Let's Talk Bitcoin. We had so many new show submissions for the contest, we've opted to create a page where you can listen to all of them at your own pace. Visit letstalkbitcoin.com/contest to peruse the entire set, and feel free to vote for more than one. We'll be selecting multiple shows to join the network in Q1. Enjoy the show, and remember to vote at letstalkbitcoin.com/contest.
Hello and welcome to the pilot of Let's Talk Altcoin. Our mission is to educate about the socio, the economic, the technological, and the philosophical implications of everything that's not Bitcoin. Bringing you down the rabbit hole of all things cryptocurrencies are my wonderful co-hosts, Michelle Seven and Charles Hoskinson. And I am Jonathan Mohan. So guys, we're doing a pilot. Yay!
Yay! Woo!
Yay!
Pilot.
So, our wonderful sister podcast over at Let's Talk Bitcoin has, done a pretty good job at hammering down what it is that is going on in the Bitcoin space, but there really isn't anyone out there talking about what's going on for altcoins. So I figure, I think the three of us could have a pretty good handle on giving that a stab.
Well, Jonathan, why don't you tell me what is an altcoin and what distinguishes it from a Bitcoin, first of all?
Right. That's a pretty good place to start. What I like to say is you don't teach Bitcoin, you teach the blockchain. And essentially the thing that Bitcoin does, and it does so well, is this notion of a zero-trust arbitration system. And what that means is, if I have no trust in you, and you have no trust in me, then how do we have a third party decide things? And normally, you have a third party who's a central authority, like a judge or a cop, and they are the ones who mediate that dispute. The thing that made Bitcoin so revolutionary was in this thing called a blockchain, it made a fully transparent third party whom, while we have no trust in, since it's fully transparent, we can verify. So even though I have zero trust in you and you have zero trust in me, we can trust the Bitcoin network because there is no trust. We can fully verify.
So that is what makes it peer-to-peer, right?
Everybody has a copy. So Bitcoin is really a combination of three things. First, it's a transaction system. Second, it's this big thing called a blockchain, which we'll get into in a moment. And third, it's a social contract. So in terms of a transaction system, I say you own something and you want to give that something to me, or you want to give something to your friend. You have to have some sort of mechanism moving value from location to location, okay? Opening your wallet and handing money to people. So Bitcoin comes prepackaged with all that code and all that software that's required to actually move value from one person to another person. But what's to prevent you, because we're in digital land, from double spending? And that's what that blockchain is. It's a big decentralized trustless database. And it's engineered in a very special, very creative way. Took a lot of time to figure out how to do this, in that it doesn't matter where you're at in the world. It doesn't matter when you spend those coins. Once you spend them, you can't spend them twice. Okay? It's a decentralized, trustless database, going back to what John's talking about, this whole transparency. Everybody can see it. Everybody can audit it. Everybody knows it. And it has a consensus that's built around an algorithm that's very elegant. And finally, it's a social contract. So, Bitcoins are just these digital tokens that they really have no value outside the value that we as people attach to them. So the larger the ecosystem grows, the more people that get into the ecosystem, the more valuable Bitcoins become. And the more utility Bitcoins have, the more valuable that they become. So that in essence is what Bitcoin is. And those were the three innovations that came out when Satoshi Nakamoto published his white paper, and basically starting this entire movement back in 2008, 2009. Altcoins are similar in that they take those three things. They have a transaction system, so we can move that value, whatever it is, from one person to the next person. Comes with batteries included for that. They generally have a blockchain, so there's this consensus on who owns what, and they also have a social contract. Now, altcoins are a bit different in that they don't necessarily have to be like Bitcoin. Okay? They don't necessarily have to be a currency. They don't necessarily have to look exactly alike and have the same proof of work and same money supply and all these things. Instead, altcoins can use those three foundational primitives to do many different things. For example, Namecoin is this beautiful altcoin that came out not too long ago, and it's trying to replace the service and utility of a government entity called ICANN.
So if I could interject, you made a point of saying that it's transparent, that the blockchain's transparent.
Yeah.
Now, from what my understanding is that it's anonymous. So how can something be anonymous and transparent at the same time?
So when we're talking about anonymity, there are two concepts that people confuse. One is privacy and one is anonymity. And privacy is when I know who you are, but I don't know what you're doing. And anonymity is when I know what you're doing, but I don't know who you are. So when people say something is anonymous, what they mean is it is completely transparent in that you can see what everyone is doing, but when it comes time to associate what these actions are with an actual human being, you're not able to do that. And it's kind of the more powerful of the two notions of privacy. But the thing that Bitcoin is it is not anonymous. It is pseudo-anonymous, which is essentially tech speak for saying it comes very close to being anonymous, but it actually isn't anonymous yet. And there are actual altcoins that are hoping to solve this problem of being a Bitcoin that's 100% anonymous, and we will love to talk about that, like ZeroCoin and projects like that, on another episode.
That sounds really exciting from my perspective, actually, in conjunction with this idea that it's peer-to-peer and that there isn't a third party, such as a central bank or a third agency who maybe is an agency of force that can disrupt and what have you. That's interesting. But I want to know, before you can actually transfer ownership of something, then you have to be able to prove that you yourself own it and thereby have the rights to transfer that property. So if it's anonymous or pseudo-anonymous, how do I prove that I actually am the owner of this before I even attempt to spend it twice in order to participate in this economy?
Yeah, it's called an alias system. So basically what you do is you take Michelle 7 and you replace it with some other component of identification. So what Bitcoin does is it replaces your name, Michelle 7, with what's called an address. So an address is this 21 to 24 character long chain of letters and numbers that you send value to. And the address has two parts. It has a public side and a private side. So the public side is stored in the blockchain. The whole world knows it. Everybody knows it. But it's not in any way unless you voluntarily tie to your identity, Michelle 7. So it's just a chain of letters and numbers. Now, you on your computer or through a cloud wallet or through some other mechanism have the ability to sign for that address, the ability to go ahead and spend the value associated with that address. And the only person in the world who has that is you and the people that you share that ability with. And all that's taken care of via the Coin wallet. So that's how you can actually have a pseudonymous system but still have global transparency. It's just by replacing your name with something else, and that something else gives you the ability to spend. And as long as you preserve that ability to spend and you don't tether your identity to the address, then you will remain reasonably anonymous.
Okay, so then is there any sort of check and balance to this system or an arbitration sort of aspect so that if I transfer something to you or you transfer it to me and we have a dispute, or because I understand that they're not reversible.
Right.
So,
it's just like cash. Satoshi really wanted to build digital cash, and so one of the characteristics of cash is if I hand you $100, you have to hand that back to me. I can't get it back unless you voluntarily give it back to me, unless there's some meta aspect like the courts get involved or the police get involved. And similarly, I guess a court could get involved and say you have to refund Bitcoins to somebody. But the algorithm, the protocol itself, actually has nothing currently built in to allow chargebacks or refunds.
And that's actually another thing that an altcoin could provide.
Yes.
So when we're explaining what Bitcoin is and is not, all of the is-nots are spaces for altcoins to come in and add their take on what a currency should be.
Provide their own little niche, you mean?
Right. So when we said Bitcoin doesn't provide chargebacks, I have no idea why anyone would want to use a currency that has chargebacks, but maybe you're a merchant in a high-fraud environment or a consumer in a high-fraud environment, and you really wish to have chargebacks. There is a need out there, or a market, rather, for maybe that, and someone could make an altcoin for that.
Well, that's a good point. And so then to the point of the social contract, people oftentimes talk to me because I am an anarchist and I don't subscribe to a social contract. I don't believe in government outside of self-government and voluntary interactions where you can opt out of agreements. So what is this social contract, and why should I not be afraid of that phrase?
Money in general, anything that has value, is in essence a social contract. So if you look at a famous painting or a Lamborghini or money itself, we say that's valuable. And then you ask yourself, well, why? It's social contract is when many people get together and through some sort of mechanism, either by fiat or by market action or whatever it may be, debate and they reach a consensus of how valuable something is, generally in reference to other things. So money has value in reference to the things that we can acquire from it. So we usually do that with a basket called the CPI. It's a basket of goods. And we can say money's more valuable if you can buy more of that basket of goods. Money's less valuable if you buy less of that basket of goods. And so Bitcoin and altcoins are exactly the same in that characteristic. Through market forces, people debate and eventually reach a price for today, and it changes all the time. That's where we say the system's very volatile because it changes very rapidly. But but nonetheless, it has a price point today of how valuable this is, and that's just simply a social contract. It's social net people decided, not government entities or corporations or other things. It's not artificial in a sense that some corporation like Microsoft said, I'm going to give you $1 per Bitcoin and create a price floor. It's not like a gift card where Target says that $50 gift card you can buy $50 worth of stuff at our store. That's an artificial peg. A social contract peg is where many people come together and they come to that consensus, which is exciting about it because this is just code, right? It should be worthless, but it's worth a lot of money, and it's increasing in value rapidly.
And Charles, you touched on a word there that I would like to further expand. You said consensus. Now, in the Bitcoin and altcoin space, that word has special meaning to it. So could you kind of explain what consensus means as it relates to Bitcoin and altcoins?
Yes, well, that was a very big word used at Occupy Wall Street and has been kind of a thematic principle in the last, couple years of civil disobedience activism. And so I know that I've heard that word tossed around quite a bit, and I would appreciate clarification for sure.
I guess there's two forms of consensus in respect. There's consensus of ownership, but my notion is there's two consensuses that we generally throw around in the ecosystem. One is consensus of ownership, so it's who owns what in the blockchain, and that's done through a very special mechanism called mining. And then the other consensus is the consensus of value. And generally, that's how much is a Bitcoin worth in relation usually to a fiat standard, like the US dollar or to the euro and so forth. And that's done via market forces, usually on exchanges. It also can be done through peer-to-peer notions like local Bitcoins and so forth. Yeah, and then, of course, there's a broader, I guess, and this is what Michelle was talking about.
Wait, if I could just interject there.
Sure.
Because, yes, I mean, I think that's a distinguishing characteristic that is important to emphasize because with the U.S. dollar, who is it that determines the value of the U.S. dollar? Not the market.
Well, actually, the market does now. It used to be pegged, and the U.S. dollar historically was pegged to gold. And then via the Bretton Woods Agreement, we were pegged to gold, and everybody else floated in value towards the U.S. dollar. And then over time, monetary policy changed in that all currencies actually float to each other. So the U.S. dollar actually has a true unit of account. Bitcoin does not. What that basically means is that people pay you in dollars and you assess value in dollars. Right now, nobody in Bitcoin land gets paid in Bitcoin and then they assess value solely in Bitcoin. They say like, oh, I made 5 Bitcoins today. That's great. What you do is you go to Bitstamp or Mt. Gox and you look up at the price and you say, oh, it's worth $600 per Bitcoin. So if I made 5 Bitcoins this week, I made $3,000. I made a lot of money.
See, I beg to differ. I actually have a few friends who don't deal in U.S. dollars in their lives.
Sure.
They do have that dialogue and that vernacular going that's so exciting. You said, though, a second ago that market is determining its value. I disagree because the Federal Reserve, if they are able to print more money and inflate the currency, they have just devalued the dollar, and that was not something that was done by the market.
Yeah, absolutely, and they do that because their mandate or goal is value stability in the dollar. What they're trying to do is either consistently have the dollar decay or have the dollar stay stable, and that's been policy for a long time. And you're absolutely right in that a lot of people don't think it's a free and fair market if an entity can go ahead and come in and just dramatically change the rules of the game by flipping a switch.
But I say that for altcoins, you know, there is this Austrian sort of like Chicago economics school of thought as it relates to economics, but that is not the case with all altcoins. I mean, there are currencies that, you know, want to have the ability to control supply or want to be able to inflate the currency rather than deflate the currency. Yeah. You know, maybe we'll talk about it another time, but there's this notion of demurrage where the currency actually punishes you for saving it.
Just like
I'm just saying that.
Yay.
Yeah. Yeah, we're all very familiar with that notion.
Okay, so here we have pretty, you know, kind of established what Bitcoin is, and now the distinguishing feature between is there a singular distinguishing feature that identifies Bitcoin from all altcoins, or is Bitcoin a subset of altcoin currency?
So Bitcoin is sort of the progenitor of everything that is an altcoin. The definition of the word altcoin is alternative to Bitcoin. And the thing that I would say is Bitcoin has the monopoly use on the Bitcoin blockchain. So the extent to which something is called a altcoin is the extent to which it cannot be used on the Bitcoin blockchain. And there are actual altcoins out there, if we're talking about shades of gray, that are actually protocol layers on top of Bitcoin. So technically they are Bitcoin, but they're doing something on top of it as well, and that's a whole other discussion.
Right. Very long-term, fun discussion to have. Yeah, I think John touched it best. It's basically Bitcoin has a blockchain, that's that database, and if it accesses that database and uses it, it's probably not an altcoin, or we should probably come up with some sort of better term than parasite coin, but it's some sort of derivative of Bitcoin. But if it uses its own blockchain structure, then we generally call it an altcoin. The way I like thinking about it is I say cryptocurrency is a term for a class of technologies, kind of like operating system, and then you have different flavors of that class. So Windows is an operating system, Linux is an operating system, and Bitcoin and altcoins are the same deal. So Bitcoin and altcoins are both cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin is a type of cryptocurrency, and altcoins are other types of cryptocurrencies. So it's Linux to Windows.
For the purpose of our show, are we going to be talking about all altcoins? Are we going to be distinguishing some from others as having greater value? Are we going to be suggesting that people buy some or not? Really, what is the purpose, and what are we going to want to share with you listeners out there?
Our goal with this podcast is to have a twice-weekly discussion to take you further down the rabbit hole into this cryptocurrency space, to kind of understand that Bitcoin is just the beginning, but there are 1,000 other things in this space that you need to learn and just get caught up on. And as it relates to the format, first podcast of the week will be a discussion like we're doing right now as it relates to learning about a particular piece of what an altcoin means, or interviewing an entrepreneur as it relates to an altcoin. And then our second of the week discussion would be a long 1-hour interview with a core developer for an altcoin, so we could really understand what it is that one altcoin does. And it's our hope to not offer financial advice. This is not a financial podcast. We would like to see ourselves primarily as an educational resource that brings clarity to this discussion of altcoins, because if you thought Bitcoin was confusing, you know, it gets 10 times harder when you're talking about everything in the altcoin space.
Great. So we're not giving financial advice to anyone, and everyone has to practice good buyer beware tactics and be, you know, self-sufficient in your investment enterprising. And I think that we're going to have a lot of fun. I'm really excited.
Oh, I'm very excited.
Yeah.
We got some good hosts here.
So if you are actually an entrepreneur in the altcoin space, or if you know or yourself a core developer for an altcoin or an altcoin-related project, give us a shout-out. We would love to have you on the show. I actually just pressed enter on purchasing the domain letstalkaltcoins.com. So by the time you're hearing this, you can send me an email at jonathan@letstalkaltcoins.com. That's jonathan@letstalkaltcoins.com.
And remember, donations are always welcome, especially in the altcoin of your choosing.
So we can be tipped. If you like us, then you can tip us, and the market will reflect on whether or not we have value.
Oh, there you go.
Well, this was really fun, guys, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this discussion and to learn about altcoins myself and to lend my ideological, philosophical understanding of freedom and self-ownership and the importance of owning the fruit of your labor, which is, kind of my, that's my pet project in life. And so, I really appreciate this opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you also for the opportunity, John, to be a host of Let's Talk Altcoin. I look forward to working with you guys and discussing all the cool innovations of the space.
Yeah, and I'm honored you two came on board, and I would love to see how this evolves and where it's going to go.
Yeah, well, from all of us to all of you out there in the cyber world, we're signing off, and we'll see you next time on Let's Talk Altcoin.
If you enjoyed the show you just listened to, visit letstalkbitcoin.com/contest and send 0.1 millibit or 0.0001 Bitcoin to the address indicated for that show. Thanks for helping.